And now for this evening's program, it is my pleasure because I have met him many times, either on Zoom or in person, Earl Carr. Earl Carr, I don't know where he is on your screen, but on my screen, he's on the upper left. He is the Chief Global Strategist at Pivotal Advisors in New York City. He's a columnist for Forbes and an adjunct professor at NYU and board of directors of the Global Institute of Financial Professionals. Please welcome Earl Carr. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joan, and I'm extremely thankful for your extraordinary leadership. Thank you for the amazing tour that you gave to me and my entire family and friends of the Chappaqua Library. And the deep and rich history of 142 years is truly, truly exceptional. So I have the honor and privilege of introducing two very, very special friends and colleagues. Number one, Dr. Carolyn Kissane, who is the academic director at NYU's Center for Global Affairs. She is also the director of a new sustainability lab that has just recently been established at NYU that we are extraordinarily excited about. Dr. Carolyn Kissane received her PhD from Columbia University, and she has been teaching and publishing in a variety of different forums, most recently in our new book, which she published chapter 3, looking at renewable and energy dynamics between the United States and China. We also are delighted to have Dr. Kevin Chen. Dr. Kevin Chen is the chief economist at Horizon Capital. He is also the chairman and CEO of a company called EDOC Acquisition Corp, which just recently went IPO, if I'm correct. So congratulations on that. He is also a board member at Infant Acquisition Corp, and he also he received his PhD from University de Lausanne in Switzerland, and we are delighted to have both of them. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. So just to explain the order of events for today. So we're going to get you guys a little bit engaged. So we have a survey poll, and our survey poll has a few questions, and it's aimed to get a sense of where people are thinking in terms of the current dynamics in U.S.-China relations. So, Joan, if you can kindly launch the poll, we can go ahead and get started. And once you do that, the poll is designed with a number of short questions. So we'll give you some time to go ahead and answer the questions. For the first question is, are you concerned in the future direction of U.S.-China economic relations? The first choice is yes, no, very concerned, or not sure. So give you a second to answer that. The second question is, are you optimistic of the future of U.S.-China engagement? Yes, no, very concerned, or not sure. Question number 3. What issue are you most concerned about in U.S.-China relations? Please rank in order of importance, looking at potential military conflict in the South China Sea, stealing of intellectual property and or cybersecurity, an economic trade war, which hurts both the United States and China, or choice number 4, the rising popularism and nationalism in both the United States and China. And question number 4, what issue are you most optimistic about in U.S.-China relations? Number 1, the promotion of cultural exchanges between the U.S. and China, for example, study abroad. Choice number 2, engagement on climate change and clean energy.
Oh, sorry. Clean energy.
No worries. Choice number 3, engagement and cooperation in combating transnational issues such as climate change or narcotics, international narcotics. Choice number 4, provider of labor-intensive goods and services. And last and final question, which is a bit controversial. Do you believe China will be the strongest global economy in the world by 2030? Yes, no, the first choice, no, yes, or not sure. All right. Well, as those answers are coming in. We'll typically start when we have about 80% participation rate. So we're at about 40% right now. And so I know that we can get a little higher. Do I hear 50? We're still stuck on 40. So we've got 45, 55. Okay, here we go. I've always wanted to do something like this, like in an auction, All right, we're at 60. Can I hear 70? It's like, can you give me 80? All right, getting close there. Come on, Chappaqua. I know you can do it. All right, we're still at 60. I'm willing to give us another maybe, few seconds for those who may have joined us a little late. And then we'll go ahead and get started because we have so much to discuss and we're really excited about really getting to your questions. So without further ado, I think Kevin and Carolyn and Jonah, if you guys are all right, we'll go ahead and end the poll now. And 65%. All right, just when I said it, we got 65.
So Earl, all I do is hit end poll.
Yes, ma'am. That's all you have to do.
Okay.
All right. So we're going to share results. Okay. So for the first question, are you concerned in the future direction of U.S.-China economic relations? A clear and resounding 69% said yes. 8% said no. 15% said very concerned. And 8% said not sure. Okay. That seems to be in line. Question number 2. Are you optimistic of the future of U.S.-China engagement? 15% said yes. 46% said no. 23% said very concerned. And 15% said not sure. Okay, so we've got more of an, clearly there's more concern than optimism in our crowd today, which seems quite understandable. Question number 3, what issue are you most concerned about in U.S.-China relations? Number 1, we have 15% said potential military conflict in the South China Sea, a very hot topic. 23% said stealing of intellectual property and or cybersecurity, also very hot, that has been reported in the news often. 15% said an economic trade war, which hurt both the U.S. and China. We saw this very clearly evident in the Trump administration. And question number 4, at 46%, the rising populism and nationalism in both countries. That's one of the highest I've seen. So that's an interesting statistic of all the polls I've seen. So question number 4, what issue are you most optimistic about in U.S.-China relations? 31% said the promotion of cultural exchanges like study abroad. 38% engagement on climate change and clear energy. I know that should make Carolyn Kissane very happy because that is her area of specialization. 0% said engagement and cooperation in combating transnational issues. 23% said provider of labor-intensive goods and services. And 8% said choice number 5, other. Now, to the controversial question. Question number 5, do you believe China will be the strongest global economy in the world by 2030? 8% said no. 62% said yes. 31% said not sure. Okay, that is interesting. That's the highest percentage that I've ever seen of running this poll that said yes. So this is wonderful. We will get into our discussion, and then at the end, we'll run our polls one last time and see if we have swayed anyone here in the audience and see if people have maybe possibly changed their minds or if things have changed a bit, and that's the exciting part. So let's go ahead and get started. Carolyn, I'd like to start with you, just kind of following in line of COP26. There's been so much discussion about climate change, not just in the United States, not just around the world, but particularly as it relates to the US and China, the largest economies in the world, clearly the largest emitters in the world as well. What do you make of the recent statements from Xi Jinping about China peaking emissions by 2030, China hoping to have net zero carbon emissions by 2060. Help us unpack some of that for both the United States and China.
Well, thank you, Earl. It's a real pleasure to be here, and many thanks to the Chappaqua Library for hosting us. It's really quite a delight to be joining you from my apartment here in the West Village. What was actually quite funny when Joan was talking about Eleanor, it's an exquisite book, but I also used to live at 29 Washington Square West, where Eleanor Roosevelt did reside for about 7 years. So yeah, I was very excited to read the book. But on to the subject of the United States and China and climate and energy. Yeah, no, I think these types of pledges, targets that that China has issued, many big developed countries have made pledges to be either what we call either net zero, which is the term that the United States is using. China has said that they will be net neutral by 2060, that they will peak their carbon emissions by 2030. To achieve, let's say, peak carbon emissions, that will mean that they will have to dramatically reduce the amount of coal that they're currently using, or they're going to have a very, very significant infusion of carbon capture, sequestration, and storage. And part of their plan is also to build out, to pretty much double their fleet of nuclear power. That is going to be part of their overall energy system. They already have nuclear, but their ambitions are quite significant for build out of new nuclear power plants. Will they do it? It's for all countries, right? The United States included. There's a question mark as to whether or not we can achieve these really ambitious net zero, net neutral carbon peak targets. You know, I think for China wants to take a lead in this front. They are also, you know, from an economic perspective, they are also the largest manufacturers. A lot of the what we call the clean renewable energy technologies that are really
right
for the energy transition. China is manufacturing about 70% of the batteries, for example, that are very important for decarbonization, manufacturing of wind turbines, solar panels, electric vehicles. China has a very, very large target to roll out EVs in China, but I think also with the hopes of exporting. And maybe we can come back to it, but on the most recent sort of joint agreement between the United States and China, which was, the timing was also very interesting because it happened almost at the very tail end of the COP26 conference in Glasgow, which many people were saying was going to be a failure because the United States and China had not sort of come together in some kind of agreement. So in that very sort of last moment, there was this joint agreement, missing a lot of granular details, but nonetheless, I think a symbolic agreement, which mirrored what happened in 2014 and 2015 in advance of the Paris Agreement, where the United States and China, you know, really went into Paris with an understanding that they were going to each commit to future targets, which then set the tone for the rest of the Paris conference, to the fact that the two largest emitters were actually going to take action, and that they were taking action in a degree of collaboration, cooperation. So we can come back. I'm, you know, my take on U.S.-China and energy is that there's a high level of interdependence. I call it complex interdependence, but both need each other. So I think, and that's not going to change. And I can definitely tell the audience more about why I think that the energy relationship is actually an area of further engagement and cooperation, even if it's not necessarily front page news.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that deep insight. Kevin, let's move to you. Can you tell the audience what was the exact title of your book? And, you know, as a chief economist, I mean, if you think about the dynamics and the economic engagement between the United States and China, which is the most consequential relationship and bilateral relationship in the world. Walk us through what is going on with respect to the current U.S. and China economic relationship. There's been so much talk about Chinese companies like Didi being delisted off the New York Stock Exchange and then relisting on to the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. We're seeing a number of other issues like Evergrande being reported in the news, and many Americans have invested in these companies. So give us a bit of color and context about what you're seeing with respect to your chapter. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Really appreciate this invitation to speak with Chappaqua Library. I've been there before. Beautiful library. So I did contribute to the chapter about the Chinese companies right now being traded on the U.S. exchanges. The title of the chapter, in fact, is "Welcome but Verify." So it's in parallel to a former president's, I guess, word about relationship at the time with Soviet Union, right? So when I wrote that chapter, my thesis was, for the Chinese companies who are traded on the U.S. exchanges, it does bring a lot of benefit to the U.S. economy, to New York City. There are roughly 500 Chinese companies being traded on the U.S. exchanges now, including Alibaba when it went IPO on the New York Stock Exchange. It was the largest IPO ever in history. Of course, also the largest IPO in the U.S. history, and it really helped the New York City to continue to be the world financial center, right? To bring the best companies to be traded here. So there are a lot of benefits, in addition to the financial industry, also the legal industry, accounting, I would say consulting. There are a lot of I would say jobs being created too. However, I would say the downside is very clear because of I guess key issues we talked about. One is about the accounting audit, right? There's I would say a lot of those companies, they did not open the books to the American auditors, and there were, of course, some of those were fraudulent, and so since the beginning of this year, the market has changed quite a bit. The total capital of the Chinese companies being traded on U.S. exchange at the beginning of the year was 2.5 trillion. Right now, it's about 1.5 trillion. So wow. Throughout this year, 1 year, about $1 trillion wealth was lost. You can attribute to things like Didi, like Alibaba, like all the stocks. On average, they lost 50%. Some of them, like education sector stocks were down 98% or 95%. So it was devastating to a lot of the companies. And my guess is, in the short term, there's still a lot of uncertainties, because you got also the big issue is also about the data privacy issue. In China, the cyber regulator in China basically said we do not allow any data to go out of China, which means for those listed companies in the US, they wouldn't be able to provide the data for the auditors. And so this is totally in conflict with the US regulation. So for those companies, they're in a impossible situation. So Joanne earlier asked about, she has not heard about it, but it is a big issue, and I do not see any, resolution, for the next year or so. But over the long term, I think it shall come back, and I think it will be very good for the, for the future of New York City as a global financial center to retain as many of those high quality companies from China as possible. But also, I think we still need to enforce all the regulations, including accounting standard, that we cannot really just, lower the standard to keep those companies. Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you, Kevin. I'm putting in the chat a link to our book. It makes for an amazing Christmas present as we have Christmas in a few weeks, especially for your friends who love books. But Carolyn, let's come to you again. In your chapter, if you can, state what your chapter is. You talk about this Jekyll and Hyde concept. Can you give us can you better explain what those concepts are as it pertains to the United States and China?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, no, it's a great question. And yeah, no, I use that as kind of an analogy in my book. And I'm sure many people in this audience, have read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And the idea is that, especially it was specific to thinking about China. As Earl pointed out earlier, China is the largest carbon emitter in the world by a lot. But of course, it's 1.4 billion people. So from a per capita carbon emissions perspective, it's low, but overall its emissions are the highest in the world. It is, over 60% of the world's coal is consumed in China. So China's sort of overall energy portfolio is on the electricity side is about 60% coal. And coal is, as we know, in terms of as fossil fuels go, as hydrocarbons go, it is the most carbon emitting. So here you have this big carbon player, right? This big emitter, but they are also what Amy Jaffe calls a green giant, because they are not only, as I said earlier, they are the largest manufacturer of wind and solar, and they really are kind of making a very deep footprint in the clean energy tech space that they then are able to export. And that's where the U.S. relationship, they're both very, very tied to each other when it comes to energy. So China imports U.S. oil, it imports U.S. gas in the form of liquefied natural gas. In fact, many people might be surprised that in the middle of a lot of what felt like headbutting between the United States and China in the last 6 months, that in October and November of 2021, there were 4 long-term LNG contracts signed that will take U.S. LNG to China. And long-term contracts are pretty significant because they're, that they're just not for the immediate, but they are multi-year contracts. And the United States is actually positioned, again, might strike some people as crazy, is positioned to become probably China's number 2 source of liquefied natural gas, right after Australia. So this is there was a period for over a couple of years where there was zero exports of LNG leaving the United States to go to China. But then in 2020, as a result of the phase 1 of the U.S.-China trade deal, there were new purchases of LNG that China made. But 2021 is actually looking like it's going to be a very robust year for overall purchases by China of U.S. LNG, and expected to get even higher in 2022 and beyond. And the United States is also positioned to be the largest producer of LNG in the next 2 years. So this is all, the Jekyll and Hyde. The Jekyll is, we are looking to go green. We've set this net neutral goal for 2060. We're seeking to peak our coal by 2030. We are producing lots of renewable energy technologies that the world needs. But on the flip side, we're Mr. Hyde because we are also a major contributor to the emissions that the world is struggling to mitigate against and adapt to. So that's where the Jekyll and Hyde comes in.
Thank you. And Carolyn, can you just kindly state the title of your chapter?
You're going to have to say, because I don't have it right here in front of me, so I don't. The exact title right now is escaping me. I've written about 3 chapters since. Do you have it in front of you?
Okay. I will go ahead and I will put it in the chat, but it's related to statecraft and competitive nature between the United States and China on energy. Okay, wonderful. Kevin, let's come to you. I mean, we've heard so much in the media about U.S. and China decoupling their economies. What does that mean from a practical standpoint? We saw 4 years of the under the Trump administration where we saw a trade war. We saw which hurt a number of different people, society, farmers, entrepreneurs. Is the U.S. and China economies, are they decoupling? And can you help us make sense of what's going on in the media and the news?
Sure. I would say for the last 4 years, or in fact for the last 10 years, the U.S.-China economic trading relationship has been extremely volatile. Carolyn talked about some of the recent good news, which is China have been buying a lot of natural gas from the U.S. In addition, in fact, this year, China has been buying a lot of corn, soybean, wheat, a lot of agriculture products from the U.S. this year. However, for the last 10 years, there were a couple of years that there was, I would say, very little, China buying from the U.S., including energy, agriculture, etc. It's related to, I would say, the trade war, but also it's related to many other factors. All in all, I would say it's very difficult. I mean, I think practically it's impossible to decouple between US and China because those two countries are just too interconnected. China, the primary, export, things like iPhone, right? We use electronics, furnitures, and a lot of to the US, and really buys a lot of products from the US. And in fact, I would say the data of last year and this year, US and China trading volume actually surged both the 2 years. So from trading point of view, I don't see any decoupling. In fact, it's getting more interconnected. However, I think I clearly see a lot of challenges, a lot of, I would call it selective decoupling happening. I think it's related to Huawei situation. A lot of chips and a lot of Chinese companies are onto the entity list now, so they cannot buy chips, for example, from the US. And high tech related, I would say also for a lot of the American companies who used to export from China to the US, now because of the higher tariff, right? So they are actually diversifying their supply base logistics from China to other, I would say, countries, including Vietnam. A lot of American companies moved there. A lot of companies actually, for the, I would say, high labor-intensive industry moved to Mexico. And interestingly, for a lot of, I would say, clothes-related garment, etc., a lot of them actually relocated to Italy. So there have been quite some of those, I would say, selective decoupling happening on both sides. And even from we're in New York State, right? New York City, in fact, has attracted a lot of Chinese capital. Hudson Yard is a prime example, one of the largest construction projects since World War II. Hudson Yard, most of the buildings actually were built with the Chinese capital. In traditional, a lot of the private sector in China, they love real estate, so they poured into New York City. But that part, I think, kind of practically dried up too now. So a lot of, I would say, up and downs. And I think going forward, it's really probably we're going to still see a lot of those, larger trading activities, energy, agriculture, etc. But I think for the IP related, high tech, etc., there could be more, decoupling happening. Yeah, and logistics to diversification to other countries.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kevin. And I see we have our first question from Steve Ashkenazi. And I should say, in full transparency, Steve Ashkenazi was my principal in high school. And so, Steve, we are delighted to see you. We can't wait to get to your question. I'm gonna just ask 5 more questions. We'll do we'll start the Q&A at 7:40. So please start thinking about your questions and please putting them in the chat. So Carolyn, for your chapter, competitive energy and climate statecraft between China and the United States, you talked just a moment about, the Jekyll and Hyde concept. Is there more of the Hyde or is there more of the Jekyll in the China relationship? Meaning, is China, when you look at the incredible impact that it's having on the environment, how do we think of it? Are they polluting more than the actual good of green finance? How do we make sense of that Jekyll and Hyde relationship that you just referred to?
Yeah, to kind of ask it in that way, I think it's hard because I think it's also important that, I tell my students, China is really, it's an extraordinary example of economic growth and development, right? Of human development, dramatic shifts in human development indicators over the last half century. They've taken hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. Kevin talked about like our iPhones, our computers, many of the goods that are just kind of part of our lives that we take for granted. China has played a part in producing them, right? In terms of there's probably a piece of the supply chain where China is involved. So so China's emissions are also because of its dramatic rapid growth as an industrial power. When the United States was in its industrial, like hyper industrial phase, we were also a very large carbon emitter. We were the largest carbon emitter until China surpassed us. So I think it's important to just sort of put that into context. But it's this idea that, China has two faces when it comes to sort of energy and climate. It is still and will continue to be, or at least it's expected to continue to be, a pretty big consumer and buyer of fossil fuels. As I pointed out earlier, liquefied natural gas. And then it's interesting because in China, they call natural gas a friendly source of energy. They don't see it in the same sort of negative ways that, for example, you see in Europe or you're seeing in the United States, where there's this sort of movement away from wanting to use natural gas.
And Carolyn, why is that? Do you know? Why is it that way?
Well, I think one of the in China, natural gas is lower carbon emitting. There is methane emissions associated with production of natural gas, but it's lower carbon emitting than, for example, coal. So if you're thinking about a transition away from coal, it's coal to gas to renewables is the way that we have been thinking about that energy transition. There are now a lot of people, especially who are, want to see a faster reduction, a faster decarbonization, that, we leapfrog. How does a country like China or India leapfrog so that they don't continue to use a lot of natural gas? But in China, natural gas is considered to be a friendly source of energy. You have to remember they're getting piped gas from Russia. They're getting piped gas from other parts of Asia. They're getting liquefied gas from Qatar, from Australia, from Malaysia. These energy is also, even as I said earlier, 4 long-term contracts signed between October and November of 2021. Energy can be a source of geopolitical cooperation. We oftentimes think of it as a source of conflict, how it gets, whether we're thinking of OPEC, but like countries that may have disagreements, they supply and demand might drive their energy relationship. So China is hungry for energy, and so they import a lot of energy, especially, as I said, gas and oil. So that's a really important part of the U.S.-China relationship. So the U.S. is exporting fossil fuels, oil and natural gas to China, but the United States is then importing a lot of the clean energy technologies, renewable energy technologies that are part of the energy transition and really important for decarbonization.
Got it. Thank you so much, Carolyn. So Kevin, we'll do this really quick and then we'll go straight to the audience for questions. I was looking at the data recently, Kevin. U.S. exports to China from January to October of this year are up 27%. If you look at US imports from China during the same period from January to October of this year are up 17%. So that doesn't seem like decoupling to me in any means in terms of goods. Clearly, there's a thriving relationship. But what is interesting is that the United States exports to India are up 50% and imports are up 40%. So it seems like the United States is clearly diversifying their export base to other economies like India, like Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Vietnam, etc. Kevin, walk us through what you're seeing in terms of global supply chains. We've seen a pandemic that has just, caused catastrophic, damage to global supply chains, both in the United States and in China. We now are hearing about Omicron. How can, economies like the United States and China, how should they position themselves vis-a-vis these extraordinary impacts to their global supply chains by global pandemics?
Sure. Yeah. So this year, the global trade is, in fact, has been a banner year. Massive surge for a lot of countries. You can attribute to a lot of reasons. China has been buying a lot of things from the US, has been selling a lot of things. India as well. India in particular, because India actually is a major energy importer. And this year there's been, global demand surge. And India has to buy, just like China, buy a lot of natural gas, coal, crude oil globally. And right. Because the energy price went up so much, you can understand that the import volume, dollar amount, did go up a lot. However, I think the global supply chain clearly is in the process of being reset. There's really a global reset going on. A lot of companies, I think even Earl, you wrote a very interesting article, pretty influential, I think, about the China Plus One strategy right now for a lot of American companies, right? So they still want to keep China as a market. They still want to keep China as a supply base for production, for supply chain, etc. However, they want to plus one. For any sector, they want to have China plus Vietnam, let's say for the electronics. They want to have China plus India for, let's say, healthcare related pharmaceutical supply. They want to have China plus Malaysia, let's say for the electronics, or China plus Italy for the clothes, etc. So the whole China plus one development, I think, has been resetting the global supply chain. And I believe next year more will be coming, because supply chain reconfiguration would take a lot of time. It's a slow moving, to turn around the ship. But I think it's happening. It's going to happen more significantly next year when, COVID slowly kind of fades out and we are trying to normalize the global trade. And I think next year we will see more change in the supply chain.
Wow, thank you, Kevin. So we're going to go to Q&A now. So I'll ask our first question from Stephen Ashkenazi. Steve, thank you for your question, and it is great to see you, my former high school principal. Stephen asks, can we compete with China regarding the mining of cobalt and copper in the Congo? So I'll go ahead and take that, if that's all right with you, Kevin and Carolyn, because that really gets to the heart of Chapter 5, which looks at China's competition in Africa with the United States. And that was written by our esteemed co-authors, Winslow Roberson and Owakala Konkankwe. And so I would say, Steve, to answer your great question, I think it is extremely challenging for us to compete with, China, particularly in countries, particularly on the continent of Africa, when you have leaders in Africa who or Chinese leaders, when they'll go to the African continent and say things like, "Hey, listen, we don't worry about human rights. We're just all about, doing business, and we'll give you loans in exchange for, we want to have stronger economic engagement with with the continent. You know, that is like singing the music to many of the African leaders. You know, they love to hear that, because what they've been told for so many years when the IMF and the World Bank goes and gives loans is this notion of conditionality, that we will give you loans on the condition that certain human rights conditions are improved in the continent in various countries. And so when China comes and provides these, you know, significant, lucrative economic loans, you know, and mentions nothing about human rights, and talks about, you know, the solidarity, what they call the South-South movements. You know, we've both been colonized by the West, and, you know, we should better work together and trade because we have this common history. You know, it really resonates with many African countries. I think what's unique now is these last, you know, today and tomorrow, many of you know there's this global democracy summit that's going on, that's being held by Biden, and it's being attended by a number of African countries in Africa. And so it's really designed for the Biden administration to have a better engagement with African countries on this notion of like-minded democratic values. And so I think that is where the Biden administration is trying to better you know, engage with African countries on these notions of democracy, and utilize that to better leverage vis-a-vis China's, you know, strong economic engagement with the continent.
Earl, if I may, Stephen,
Sure.
it's a fantastic question. It's a question that I've been actually having a lot of conversations about recently. And I'd love to know how Earl did in high school, so you can put that in the chat and give us his like report card results. But on the topic of copper and cobalt, this is, you know, we call it part of the renewable energy, the energy transition in terms of these minerals. And China does have an advantage, both with regards to operation of the mines in the Congo, as well as, and this is, I think, something that a lot of people don't know, but a lot of the mineral processing. So even if it's mined in, for example, the Congo, or if it's mined in Chile, a lot of the processing goes back to China. So China is responsible for about 70% of the world's mineral processing. So when we're thinking about sort of the minerals that go into renewable energy technologies, that's also a very, I think, important advantage that China has, not only on these, you know, critical minerals for the energy transition, but what are referred to as rare earths. And China has about 90% of the world's rare earths. So maybe you remember 2010 sort of spat between China and Japan, when China said that it was going to ban rare earths from going to Japan. It was short-lived, but I think it scared. It definitely was a sort of jolt of reality thing about how much of the world's rare earths are being mined and processed by China. And that's, I think, a similar situation that we see around some of these really important minerals for the energy transition. But we are finding also alternatives, which I think is something that the United States is sort of seeking to find ways to sort of innovate, so that we have cleaner processes.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. Next question is from Andrea Papa. And the question is, to what extent are the positive results in the trade balance and agricultural and energy exports from the US to China a result of Trump's pressure on China? Kevin, would you like to take a stab at this?
Sure, I can try. I think China has been a major buyer of agriculture and energy globally for decades. So China needs to buy a lot. And yes, I think there is, there's some credit, I think, would go to the trade war discussion, more pressure being put on. So China decided, because of the, to balance the trade relationship, they need to buy more from the US. That's clear. However, you can also argue that, in fact, before this year and last year, in 2019, in fact, because of the trade war, China went to Brazil to buy massive amount of soybean, for example.
Mm.
So that was like, I guess,
Right.
also kind of retaliation.
Yes.
Of course, if you look at some of the buying, in fact, the Brazilian merchants bought soybean from the US and we sold it to China and charged a premium for it. And to add a little more, twist to the situation this year, China has not had good relationship with Australia. So they were trying to buy less from Australia, which means they would have to buy more from other countries. So obviously they switched to the buying to the US. So it's a complex relationship. All in all, China as a nation, there's a major shortage of food, a major shortage of a gap for energy supply. So they would have to buy globally. America, in fact, has always been, probably the most efficient agriculture producer. So it actually does make economic sense for China to buy a lot of wheat, soybean, etc. from the US. It is actually a good thing for the US and a good thing for China to save money too. But as we talked about, for the last 5-10 years, it has been extremely volatile. And really, it hurt US when they start buying from the Midwest, but also it hurt China very badly too when they decided to buy, let's say, from Ukraine, from Russia, for obviously for the for agricultural products at higher price and a lower quality. So hopefully going forward, it will be more stable, will be better for everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Kevin. Andrea, if I could just chime in very, very briefly, since I looked at the trade data, if you look at the last 4 years under the Trump administration, one of the primary arguments that he used to engage in a trade war with China is that it would create and allow for the United States trade deficit with China to become much smaller. What you saw after 4 years, Andrea, is that the actual trade deficit between the United States and China got larger after 4 years. So the trade war policy was an abject failure. I think if we're trying to ascribe what are the recent positive results in the trade balance, I think that it's a number of factors. Number one, under the phase 1 agreement that was provided between the United States and China, China has agreed to buy more products from the United States. And so, as a result of that, China has, China catch up with those agreements. They're not quite there yet, but I just wanted to highlight that important component. So we have 7 minutes left. I'd like to give, so if any of you have any other questions, please ask them. But I'd like to give Carolyn and Kevin one last, just if you could share last takeaways, if there was one quintessential point that you wanted the readers, the audience, to take away from your book chapter, what would it be? We'll start with Carolyn and then we'll go with Kevin.
Thank you. No, it's a great question. I mean, as Earl, you wrote in reminded me of the title of my own chapter. This idea of energy and climate statecraft, which I think we're seeing in a much more clearer way, right? I think countries are coming out strong, especially the United States and China, about what each intends to do to address climate change, both within its own borders as well as sort of more globally. And then, the United States wears, 2 hats as well, just as China does. China is, an energy giant. It's very energy hungry. But the United States is a petropower of sorts, right? We are the world's largest producer of oil. We are the world's largest producer of natural gas, and soon to be the world's largest exporter of liquefied natural gas. So, but at the same time, we are on a, we're seeking to radically decarbonize our own system, and we are hoping that the rest of the world will also decarbonize. So it's, I think energy is complex, and one of the points that I really try to highlight is this complex interdependence, which I think also Kevin really did a beautiful job sort of describing on the economic front that, China needs a lot. It's a very, very big country, and the United States is a great supplier of a lot of what China needs. And so I do think there are, ways to retain. And I also believe that we won't see any kind of deep decoupling. The idea of selective decoupling, I think, is a really interesting one, but not deep decoupling. So on the energy side, I think we'll continue to see that, both the United States and China need each other, and that we'll continue to have engagement. And again, I think more sort of quieter cooperation. It's not going to be, blasted across the front page of the New York Times, but it is in fact happening.
Great, thank you. Kevin,
sure.
Final thoughts.
Sure. Carolyn really spoke very well. I don't have too much to add, but I would say, right now, clearly, I've seen a lot of, surveys, talks, basically are showing that U.S.-China relationship is at historical low level, probably lowest, since 1970s, something like that. And, I think, and for the near term, it's clear that we don't see a lot of, potential to see the relationship to improve substantially. We might actually be at this low point for a while. However, I think, we need to really look at the long term. Over the long term, hopefully a lot of things would improve. I think the two great nations, with great culture, they eventually, I think, I would believe that there will be much better relationship down the road. Yeah, that's my, at least my personal hope. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. With 3 minutes left, I think it'll be difficult for us to do another poll, just to wrap things up. But I did want to share that, in terms of final thoughts, China has always utilized parity with the United States, not only for legitimacy with the Chinese Communist Party, but also for China's own modernization efforts. You saw this parity very distinctly in the 1960s with nuclear weapons and development and to acquire nuclear technology. You also saw this parity during the 1980s and 1990s with China's accession into the World Trade Organization and being part of the international community. And now you're seeing that parity particularly striking in the era of 5G, big data, artificial intelligence. I remember traveling to China for the first time in 1998 as a junior at the College of William and Mary, studying abroad. And I lived on a foreign, in a foreign dormitory. There was 25 of us on one floor, and there was one phone. The old phone that you would press buttons. It was one phone for 25 of us. And when I went to make a call to my sister to hear my little nephew's voice when he was born for the first time, I had to wait an hour. Fast forward 20 years later, I am working in China. I'm traveling on a high-speed rail train, and I'm using the Wi-Fi on this train. And I'm using the Wi-Fi that gets me beyond the firewall of China. And I'm using a cell phone that is being produced in the millions in nearby neighboring provinces of China. And so I think and Carolyn, I remember you sharing your story of when you first traveled to China, I think about 2 years before I did.
It was 1992, Earl. It was 1992.
Oh, whoa. Sorry, I got that way wrong. 1992, through Trans-Siberia. And I think for those of us who have experienced firsthand the transformational growth of China, I think it's so important to put that in perspective and context. And so with that, we wanted to thank you so much for attending. We wanted to thank you, Joan, who today delivered our book to President Bill Clinton and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. So thank you so much for that. It is, you're on mute.
And I want to thank the three of you so much I am not, nor do have I ever claimed to be an authority on international economics, but especially between China and the United States. But, and I perused the newspaper, mostly reading national news. And today, this evening, you summarized so clearly for me some of the issues that I have sort of picked up in the newspaper over these last few months when China and the United States has been front page. And I really want to thank you for your clear, concise explanation of US-China relations and how it sort of evolved from, Trump to Biden, and just like your title, and beyond. There were so many things I learned about the China trade. I had no idea. And I want to thank you for being so clear and so understanding. And I guess we're getting a couple of compliments soon. But thank you again for coming here. And I'm sure President Clinton and Secretary Clinton will enjoy your book. I'm sure you will get a response from them. And I thank the audience for coming to this program. And I hope all of you will go to our website and see the programs that are offered. But also we are videotaping this program. So if you have friends who would have liked to have come, but it was the wrong time, wrong date, please tell them to visit our website, which is chappaqua.library.org, and to see this program in its entirety. So again, thank you, Carolyn, Kevin, and especially Earl for working with me tirelessly over this entire program and the polls. So thank you again. And thank you all. Hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks.